Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome. Rainer Maria Rilke died in 1926, early 20th century. Rilke is usually numbered among the greatest of the spiritual poets, up there with Rumi and Hafiz and William Blake. Part of the power of Rilke is his use of symbols, often in stark, bold contrasts, as in the poem we just heard. Let me reread it just a moment for you. I live my life in ever-widening circles that stretch themselves out over all the things. I won't perhaps complete the last one, but intend to try. I circle around God, around the ancient tower, as I have circled for thousands of years, and I don't know yet, am I a falcon, a storm, or a mighty song? Now, just notice how he lays these things out. Ever-widening circles, further and further out, okay? They stretch themselves over all the things. You probably know some Chinese philosophy, all the things, the 10,000 things, are the material existence that we experience through our perceptions. So I circle around God, around the ancient tower. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a mighty song? Now this is classic Rilke. The ever-widening circles are about life's journey, aren't they? That's fairly clear, I think. And that odd line is classic Rilke. I circle around God, around the ancient tower. Now, is God the ancient tower? Is part of the question. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to bet on one today. Is the tower about strength, in which case God makes sense in this context, or is the tower about human artifacts, human ego, human beings building stuff out of the 10,000 things, the material? Or is it both? Which, of course, often in Rilke, you can read it two or three ways. And I will come back to that, but I want to start in a different direction and then come back to it. Last Sunday, I discussed how a non-authoritarian way of being and acting leads each of us toward an open questioning of reality itself, that which we perceive with our senses, reality. Now, one of the things I mentioned last week, a side effect of that process is to decrease the power of that harsh inner voice, the voice of the dictator within, that voice that insistently tells you, should, must, obey my authority. As I said last week, the dictator always answers why questions with, because I told you so, because I said so. However, the art and creativity of life lies in answering why with, I wonder, interesting, that sort of thing. And that's what we try to do here. As I said last week, that's exactly what our Ethical Explorers program for younger people is, and it's a model for lifelong learning, which is something we here at FUS very much believe in. We're not about data dump, we are about experience. That's the way we focus. A place where we take that why question seriously, and then we look at it from various perspectives, philosophically, theologically, psychologically, sociologically, and on, but mostly about art, the way of producing art as experience in our world. Because, as I said last week, each of us is the artist of our lives. You got no choice about that. The question is whether we accept it or not. And I say the wisdom says, yes, do. The question is whether to accept or duck responsibility for your own human agency, what you do in the world. That decision, the decision to take responsibility for your own life, is the deepest form of transformation. because you're playing without a net. This week, I want to think about the possibility of taking the inevitability of change by the throat, if you will, or at least in stride, and we can say to that Cartman within, I'm watching you. I'm going to take my opportunities to grow. And here's a question that's a little more open-ended. Is G-O-D, God, got, a proper noun or just a noun? Or do those letters function as more than one thing? I think they do. Maybe it's both a word and a symbol at the same time, which gets complicated, doesn't it? Maybe it's also a concept. Concept, symbol, word. In which case, God, what Rilke is saying is that God, like a tower, is a human invention, which I think is what he's saying. Because the only way to get to this place of the mighty song is to dismiss social constructions, I think. Now, consider this for example. The philosopher Timothy Morton, I've mentioned him before. By the way, he's non-binary, they. In their book, Hyperobjects, opines that we human beings are considerably more comfortable talking about infinity than large quantifiable numbers. Now let that sink in a minute. We're more comfortable thinking about infinity, forever, that sort of thing, than we are thinking about a number like 3,212,000. What is it about our brains that does that? But realizing it is, I think, important. We can easily imagine the end of the world, but we can't imagine the end of COVID. They're just different in our brains. God is an easy concept for whatever reason. I don't know why. Why is the human brain more comfortable with forever, infinity, God, those big things, rather than quantifiable numbers? Timothy Morton writes, there is a real sense in which it is far easier to conceive of forever than a large finitude. Forever makes you feel important. 100,000 years makes you wonder whether you can imagine 100,000 of anything. End quote. You get the point. Now, yes, I am mathematical myself, as many know around here, but so I don't think about numbers very much at all. But yeah, I do think about, God and reality a lot, and so there you go. It's just easier. Now, let's think this through. What this tells us is that it's easier for the average human being to think about God and eternity than something they can actually do in the world. Isn't that odd? God or the national debt? We would rather think about God. It's just easier, right? A concept is an abstract idea or a mental representation of things, materiality, right? Meaning actions also and qualities, relationships, and those kinds of things. It does not have a physical form and exists only in the mind. Justice is a concept. There is no justice. We just try to get at that concept by what we do. That's how our brains work. A symbol, on the other hand, is a physical or tangible representation that stands for or suggests something else. So a heart is love, right? We all know that. A cross is Christianity. Now keep in mind that the largest monotheisms in our world, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all forbid symbolic representation of G-O-D. Graven images, as you know, is one of the top 10 bad things to do. Concepts are mental constructs that we use to think about reality, whatever that is, another abstract concept, I guess, while symbols are the means through which these concepts are communicated or represented to others. Symbols, then, like, the blindfolded lady with the scaly things there, that's justice. What does that have to do with anything about justice? It's an abstract concept for us. And that's what to start thinking about, I think, if we want to really get at what Rilke is saying, and maybe what many of us are saying. So if I have this right, each human mind has a concept of God, or for atheists, a sort of God that you don't believe in, but you probably chose one not to believe in, right? That concept is described in symbols. In the case of English, the letters G-O-D. But then back to Rilke and those lines. Because exactly here is the why the writing and reading of poetry struck me as interesting decades ago. Exactly what this line does. I circle around God, around the ancient tower. As a poet, playing with those symbols and those concepts and those words has always been very meaningful to me, because I've suspected that I can get at some kind of truth with a little t. This is a very old trope in mystical thought, that circling, and circling the ancient tower. The still point in the turning world, as the mystical poet T.S. Eliot phrased it. That is mysticism, that point that does not turn, right? But is the ancient tower G-O-D God, or is it another sort of symbol? For example, many European poets in the early 20th century, when Eliot and Rilke lived and wrote, used symbols that they considered to be archetypes. If you know Jungian psychology, you know about archetypes. Now, very basic symbols are archetypes then, buried deep in the human psyche, according to these poets and psychologists anyway, deep in the human psyche somewhere, and then poets will pull it out and share it. In this case, one of the big things, and Rilke was interested in the tarot, so I think this probably is referring with the tower to the tarot deck. In the case of tarot, the symbolism is initially frightening. Oh my God, I'm going to be leaping out of a burning tower. Is that what my future is? The lightning bolt represents a sudden insight that leads to a major shift in understanding or perspective. Lightning hits, catches on fire, these people jump out. It's a transformation. The rider deck is the one on the right, more contemporary one is the one on the left. You begin to see why Rilke is a spiritual genius when you reflect on this. The tower is almost certainly a symbol for things human built. A tower is created by human beings. It's built out of social norms. It's the concretization of social needs and wishes, right? But is the tower always going to say, because I say so? Is it always going to be a human formation? And you'll notice on this, I put this in the deck there just because I think it's a little more abstract than this, but your handy-dandy beginner's guide to tarot says your thoughts and beliefs are keeping you from realizing the hard reality of the world. Just stop being too defensive. That's a very simple way to think about this, I think, but it works anyway. And yeah, you're going to lose your romance because most people use tarot for romantic relationship predictions, actually, right? All right, so that's why Rilke is good at what he does. He sets up these assumptions. Now, look at this one, and what you will see on the left there is that the tower is made very much, illustrated very much like the Tower of Babel, which God didn't like, by the way, if you didn't read your Bible recently. God didn't like human beings being so egotistical that they built a tower, and so God made everybody speak a different language so we couldn't cooperate as human beings anymore, right? So the Tower of Babel often comes in. Also, more contemporary illustrations often show something like the Twin Towers or some kind of a big skyscraper building that is burning, right? So these are the ways that we tear down the assumptions, if that makes sense. In some tarot decks, the tower is explicitly the Tower of Babel, and God doesn't like it. Is Rilke saying that the God symbol and the tower symbols are both in reality only human constructs, only human concepts that should perhaps be reimagined? Can we think about human assumptions and God differently is the question. Now, this ambiguity reveals Rilke's poetic genius, and I think a spiritual genius as well. And that, for brilliant poets, those two things often go together. Yes, the tarot card signifies the breakdown of existing structures. It is change, right? And it serves as a symbol of the destruction of the ego, the self, the human assumptions, the I, the almighty white patriarchal I, ego, right, that Freud talks about, which is just another word for I, anyway, right? We make this assumptions coming out of the ways that we have been alive in the world. But how do we reach transformation? How do we get to art? Which is what Rilke thinks of as the way we can really change our minds, and I agree with them. Sure, transformation can hurt, but ultimately transformation is about liberation, right? And liberation is possible through the reconsideration of the symbol systems that we live with. I think this is what Rilke is saying. To check myself on these assumptions, I asked my friendly AI program to rewrite the Rilke poem in the spirit of Flatt and Scruggs, which is music I understand, right? And so AI cooperated and wrote the Rilke Cannonball. Now, I only changed this a little bit, by the way. In circles ever broadening, the AI can't do dialect. This really makes me irritated, but it can't do. In circles ever broadening across the land, they gently sprawl, stretching wide o'er hills and valleys, over every mountain tall. Round the Almighty I wander. Oh, that's why I wanted to do this. Around the mighty I wander. Round the tower old and grand. So AI thinks these two symbols go together as well. And I think I agree. Am I a hawk, a soaring, or a storm upon this land? Or perhaps a song that's mighty, born from deep within the heart, echoes through these endless circles where ending's just a start, where ending's just a start. So that's Flatt and Scruggs writing Rilke. So it puts these two ideas together, and I do think that they do. Although AI rushes past the point in order to get to the final question of the poem, the AI thinks the last question is the important one. Am I a falcon, a storm, or a mighty song? Now think about those symbols for a moment. A falcon silently circles a tower, doesn't it? Yeah. A storm crashes in violently and then it's gone. It's another way to be, according to Rilke. Clearly, a mighty song is what the poet is aiming at. It's what Rilke wants to do with his life. And I add that Rilke has managed to do that, given the evidence of the poem's staying power in the artistic world. This sucker's 100 years old and more. The point of our existence, according to Rilke, is to create that work of art that is our lives. We are the artists of our lives. And the way to that transcendent art is breaking through social constructions in order to see clearly as a self. Now, this is me about 30 years ago or so. Artists have always known that we can in some way deal with the language of the holy or the sacred. 30 some odd years ago, this is obviously Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, where else, right? Getting a poetry blessing before the ashes of two San Francisco street poets, Bob Kaufman and Jack Micheline. So I'm officially in the street poet, well, it wouldn't be Hall of Fame, would it? They died in the street. But if I ever run out of other things to do in my retirement, I can go to San Francisco and die in the street. It's an option, right? And maybe I'll get my ashes in there. Now, let's look just a moment at these guys. Bob Kaufman is on the left. Yeah, flip on through there. We don't want to see. There. Bob Kaufman is on the left. He's known in France as the American Rimbaud. We don't know much about him here in the U.S. He just kind of was there, one of the street poets in the Beatnik era. But the American Rimbaud. sometimes, especially in France, for some reason, poets get translated better than they are in English. And that's the case with Edgar Allan Poe as well, as you may know. So Bob Kaufman is the American Rimbaud, and the guy on your right there is Jacques Micheline, one of the finest performance poets ever, as far as I'm concerned. He literally died sort of on the street in a BART train going through San Francisco, Bay Area Rapid Transit. So I think he would be pleased to die on BART. But so there you go. Now, I go back to these guys and I talk about this to leave you with this. Many of you know the work of Alan Lightman. He's a favorite among our folks because he has 2 assignments at MIT as a professor. Right? He is a theoretical physicist, and he's also in the humanities department because he writes poetry. Right? So I've been reading one of his books recently. The reason a lot of freethinkers follow Lightman's work is that he puts scientific materialism together with a kind of mysticism that I'm going to share with you in just a moment. In his newer book, The Transcendent Brain, Spirituality in the Age of Science, Lightman writes this: most transcendent experiences are completely ego-free. Now, that's exactly what we were talking about breaking down the tower, right? Are completely ego-free. In the moment, we lose track of time and space. We lose track of our bodies. We lose track of ourselves. We dissolve. And yet, spirituality emerges from consciousness and the material brain. And the paramount signature of consciousness is a sense of self, an I-ness distinct from the rest of the cosmos. Thus, curiously, a thing centered on self creates a thing absent of self. That's the key to mysticism, and it's the key to the Rilke poem. I think that's exactly what Rilke is talking about. Change is inevitable. We know that. Transformation is not inevitable. How do we turn the inevitable change into the good transformation? Now, there is this thing called religious creativity. We don't talk about it a lot around here, but it's how people use the material that we pick up through life about spirituality, about world religions, and all those things, and we put them together, and then we are religiously creative. That's why I write poetry in this way. So let's stop thinking of the human religious impulse as hidebound and dusty. Religious creativity is as new as the next time you think about this. All right? That's how it works. Rilke wasn't anybody special either until he began to chip away at the ego. Many of you know another of his poems that ends, "You must change your life." And his idea is that with art, you're always going to be hit with it and say, damn, I got to change my life. I have to do something outside of the common spiritual answers to life. I have to rethink God and the tower. So religious creativity, the religious impulse is with us all the time. I don't know if it's a religious impulse or not. That's what it's been called. But is it religious impulse? I don't know. Spiritual impulse? Spiritual but not religious? I don't know. But we all seem to have it. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have this ease with saying God and thinking about eternity and that kind of thing. Something about our brains. Last Sunday, I made a claim asking, what are we here for if not to listen to the universe as closely as we can, to conform to the universe as closely as we can, and to live our stories as honestly as we can? Only you are the artist of your life if you take responsibility. Alan Lightman also writes this in the book. Most transcendent experiences, those true religious, mystical experiences. Most transcendent experiences are completely ego-free in the moment. We lose track of time, right? We lose all of that. And yet, if you tag each of the atoms in your body, he says, this is a scientist, and follow them backward in time, through the air that you breathed during your life, through the food that you ate, back through the geological history of the earth, through the ancient seas and soil, back to the formation of the earth out of the solar nebular cloud, and then out into the interstellar space, you could trace each of your atoms, those exact atoms, to particular massive stars in the past of our galaxy. At the end of our lifetimes, those stars exploded. At the end of their lifetime, those stars exploded and spewed out their newly forged atoms into space, later to condense into planets and oceans and plants and your body at this moment. I think that's a heck of a lot better than any religious story I know of about that, right? And I think that is what the poets are calling us to do. That's why I write poetry anyway. It's why people read poetry. It's why we keep circling around that ancient tower, thinking about it, considering it, breaking down our conglomerated selves into a new being that is the artist. And we will continue looking for ways to break down assumptions and egotism that keeps us from realizing our true selves. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.